Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where the streets are too quiet for comfort. You can almost hear your own footsteps bounce off the empty walls of houses with shuttered windows, doors left unlatched as if their owners might wander back from the grave. But you and I both know they won't. The Black Death has already rolled through here like a tide, and what it didn't take in the feverish nights it left behind in silence. And sure, you might think, lucky you, still breathing. But as you stand in this brittle morning air, you probably won't survive this either, not in the way you imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you'd tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow lane, the stones slick from last night's rain, and your boots, a hand-me-down pair with one sole beginning to peel away, slap wetly against them. The smell is the first thing you notice, though. It's not the sharp, nose-wrinkling stench of a plague pit anymore. Those were filled months ago. This is a duller scent of damp earth and something old, like linens that have been left to mildew. It's the smell of abandonment. The houses are uneven, some leaning toward the road as if they're tired too. Here and there, a shutter bangs loose in the wind, a hollow clap against the plaster. In the doorway of one house, a wooden stool lies tipped over, its leg broken clean off. You can picture the moment it happened, maybe during one of those panicked nights when the sick stumbled toward the door calling for someone who'd already fled. Historians still argue whether whole villages were truly abandoned or if survivors just kept to themselves. But in this place, either story would fit. You pass by a well, the rope dangling slack over the stone lip. There's a bucket, yes, but it's been dry for weeks. You remember how the old water drawer used to whistle while he worked? An off-key little tune about a fox in the hen house. One morning you woke up and the whistling was gone. No one went to check on him. Everyone was too busy counting their own heartbeats, waiting for the next cough. The air feels colder now, though the sky is the same heavy gray it's been for days. You pull your cloak tighter, a woolen thing patched so many times, it's almost a quilt. It's funny how fabric remembers its shapes. Your cloak still falls in the same folds it used to when your father wore it. It smells faintly of the garlic he once tucked in the pocket, because your grandmother swore it kept the pestilence away. That trick didn't save him, but you keep the scrap anyway. At the end of the lane, the church squats like a watchful crow. Its bell hasn't rung for a wedding in, well, you can't recall. These days, the only sounds from inside are the muttered prayers of Father Hugh, whose voice always sounds hoarse, as though he's been swallowing secrets. You step past it, trying not to look at the patch of ground behind the low stone wall. It's lumpy now, with weeds growing tall between the mounds. In the fields beyond, the emptiness is even worse. Rows of withered stalks stand like brittle bones, and here and there scarecrows lean drunkenly, their straw faces caved in. You remember when the harvest brought the whole village together. Children chasing each other between stacks of wheat. Women gossiping as they bound sheaves. Men laughing while hefting sacks onto carts. Now, the only movement is a crow hopping along the ridge of a furrow, its head cocked at you like it knows something you don't. Your stomach growls. a low reminder that you haven't had a proper meal in 2 days. You think about the bread that used to come from Mistress Elwyn's oven, the thick, crusty loaves she'd pull out, steam curling in the air. She's gone now. Some say she left for the next town over. Others whisper she never made it past the bend in the road. And still, that smell of baking bread lives in your head as real as the memory of her flour-dusted hands. You push on toward the edge of the village. The mud here is deeper, sucking at your boots. The wind carries a sound, a rhythmic clank and scrape. You follow it to find a blacksmith at work. He's alone, bareheaded despite the chill, his hair matted with sweat. He nods at you but doesn't speak, just keeps hammering at a bent plow blade. You notice the forge burns low, not because there's no coal, but because there's little reason to rush. Without enough hands to work the land, the plow won't see much use. The world feels stretched thin, like a cloth pulled too tight over a frame. There's space everywhere, too much of it. Space at the table, in the fields, along the road. The plague took the noise with it, and in the quiet, you start to notice things you might have missed before. The faint hum in your ears, the way your own breath fogs in the air, the itch of the mended seam under your arm, and yet, under all this stillness, something stirs. It's not hope, not yet. More like the twitch of a limb that's been numb too long. You wonder if this new emptiness might mean freedom, or if it's just a bigger pen with the same locked gate. After all, the Lord still sit in their halls, untouched by your hunger. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, twice, then goes silent. You look toward the sound, but there's nothing moving on the road ahead. Just the same gray sky, the same wind tugging at your cloak, the same path leading you away from what was and toward whatever comes next. You keep walking. You leave the village behind, but it clings to you in its own way. The sight of that tipped stool, the smell of damp stone, the weight of all those empty houses. The road out is narrow, hemmed in by hedges that haven't been trimmed since before the plague, their branches scratching at your sleeves as you pass. The mud sucks greedily at your boots, pulling you half a step slower with each stride. Somewhere ahead, you hope there's work, because even though the world feels hollowed out, you've learned the hard way that emptiness doesn't mean opportunity falls in your lap. The first farm you come to is a ghost. The gate hangs open, one hinge rusted through, swaying faintly in the wind. In the yard, a cart sits with one wheel missing, its bed still scattered with shriveled turnips. You poke at one with your toe. It's soft, almost liquid inside, and wrinkle your nose. You remember a time when farmers would chase strangers off with shouts and dogs, but now there's no one here to care. Historians still argue whether survivors like you found it easier to get hired in the plague's aftermath, or if landlords closed ranks to keep wages low from the start. But standing here, the truth feels more tangled. Yes, there's land that needs plowing, hay that needs cutting, animals that need tending. But there's also fear, the kind that makes the living cling to what's theirs more tightly than ever. You cross a low meadow, your boots leaving deep prints in the sodden grass. In the distance, you spot another figure. At first you think it's a man, but as you draw closer, you see it's a scarecrow, its arms outstretched in a half-welcome, half-warning gesture. A crow sits on its shoulder, completely unbothered. You almost laugh, because the bird's got more nerve than most people these days. By mid-morning, You reach another cluster of cottages, and this time there's smoke rising from one chimney. Encouraged, you knock on the door. After a long pause, a woman peers out, her face drawn and pale, her eyes narrowing at the sight of you. She looks you up and down, assessing, are you healthy enough to be worth talking to? Desperate enough to work for scraps? I'm looking for labor, you tell her. Her mouth tightens. We've got nothing to spare. My husband's in the field, and he'll see to it himself. Then she shuts the door, and you're left staring at the wood grain. You turn away, muttering under your breath about people who think their patch of earth is the last in Christendom. But you can't quite blame her. The plague didn't just kill, it taught everyone to keep their distance. Further along, you find the husband she mentioned bent over a row of sprouting onions. He doesn't look up when you greet him, just mutters that he's not hiring. But then, almost as an afterthought, he says, you might try at Lord Merton's estate. Lost 2 men last winter. The name sparks a memory. Merton's lands are wide, with more fields than his household could ever work alone. But Merton is also known for paying barely enough to keep a man upright. Still, coin is coin. You follow the husband's directions, and soon the estate comes into view. A long, low manor with thick stone walls, set back from the road. The gates are open, and a pair of geese wander near the entrance, honking at you like they're guarding the place. You step past them, ignoring their half-hearted pecks, and make your way to the stable yard. A boy of perhaps 12 looks up from mucking out a stall. He wipes his nose with the back of his sleeve. You here for work? Yes. Wait here. He disappears into the shadowed doorway of the stable, and a moment later returns with a man whose hair is going gray at the temples. The steward, you guess. He gives you a long, slow once-over. We've need of a hand for the lower fields, he says. 6 pence a week, meals when there's food. You want to argue, 6 pence is a pittance, especially with so many gone and labor short. But his eyes are flat, unyielding. It's the same lesson the woman at the cottage taught you. Even when the fields are empty, the lords and their men decide the worth of your hands. The steward adds, we'll dock your pay if you fall sick or miss a day. You nod, because what else can you do? You've learned that in this new world, saying yes quickly is sometimes the only way to keep walking forward. By midday, you're already in the field, turning earth with a wooden-handled hoe. The soil is damp and heavy, clinging to the blade, and the work pulls at your back. A thin sun peeks through the clouds, warming your shoulders just enough to remind you of summers before the plague. Summers when the fields were alive with voices, laughter carrying across the rows. Now it's just you, the wind, and the occasional caw of a distant bird. At the end of the day, you're given a hunk of coarse bread and a cup of thin ale. You eat sitting on the low stone wall near the field, watching the sky fade from gray to a bruised purple. Your muscles ache in that satisfying way that comes from honest labor, but there's no ignoring the fact that you'll have to repeat it tomorrow for the same 6 pence, no matter how much you might be worth in a fairer world. A dog pads over and sits at your feet, eyes hopeful for crumbs. You break off a piece of bread and hand it down. He takes it gently, tail thumping against the dirt. You wonder if he's a stray or if, like you, he belongs to someone who doesn't much care where he goes as long as he comes back to work when needed. The stars start to prick through the darkening sky, and you pull your cloak tighter. Tomorrow, you'll rise with the first light, walk the same path to the field, and work until your arms feel like they might drop off. And the day after that, and the day after that. The plague may have taken half the village, but it didn't take away the simple truth. If you're poor, survival is just another word for work that never ends. The next morning, you wake with the gray light seeping through the thatch above you. The air smells faintly of damp straw and last night's smoke from the hearth. Your back protests before you even stand. Yesterday's work has left it stiff, like someone's driven wooden pegs into your muscles. You rub at it as you shuffle toward the door, pulling on your cloak, still stiff in the folds where the damp never quite dries. You head toward the lower fields, where the steward set you to work yesterday, but halfway there you notice a commotion near the manor gates. A group of men, 5 or 6, all in patched tunics and worn hose, stand in a loose knot, their voices raised, but their posture careful. You don't need to get too close to guess the subject. Wages. The steward's voice cuts through theirs like a saw through green wood. It's the king's law now. Statute of laborers. 6 pence a week is the going rate, and you'll take it or be gone. You've heard of the statute, of course. Word trickled down last year how Parliament, with the king's blessing, decided to fix wages at what they were before the plague. Never mind that there's half the workforce left and twice the work to do. The law says you can't bargain for more, can't walk off to find someone who'll pay better. If you do, you're the criminal. One of the men dares to speak up. There's more land lying fallow than ever. You can't work it without us. The steward's mouth curls in a humorless smile. Then it will lie fallow. The Lord's coffers aren't to be emptied for the likes of you. The men exchange glances, the kind that carry more words than they dare speak aloud. You catch one of them muttering something under his breath, probably not fit for church ears. Historians still argue whether laws like the statute truly kept wages low, or whether local bargains slipped through in spite of them. But here, with the steward standing like a wall between hunger and fair pay, you can see the law's teeth clearly enough. You keep your head down and skirt the group, but the conversation clings to you as you reach the field. You think of your father, who once said, "A man's work should be worth what another man would pay for it, not what some lord in a far-off hall decrees." But your father didn't live to see this new world, where laws are written to make sure the poor stay in their place even when the old order's been shaken to its bones. The morning passes in a blur of labor, turning earth, pulling weeds, and spreading the thin compost that passes for fertilizer here. The wind is brisk, carrying with it the smell of damp and something acrid from the smithy across the way. Your hands are raw, and you flex them now and then to keep them from stiffening entirely. At midday, you pause for a bite of bread and a sip from your leather flask. A boy you haven't seen before ambles over, his hair sticking up like it's been cut with a kitchen knife. "You're new here," he says, tearing at a hunk of bread that looks even harder than yours. "2 days," you reply. "They'll keep you on until the harvest, then toss you. My uncle's been tossed 3 times this year already." You shrug. "Better than nothing," he smirks. "For now." Then he's off, leaving you with the uneasy sense that he's probably right. By late afternoon, a thin mist has crept in from the low fields. The horizon blurs, and your world shrinks to the few feet of damp soil in front of you. You lose track of time, your body moving on the steady rhythm of work. Bend, dig, straighten, shift. Every so often, you catch sight of the steward at the far edge of the field, his eyes sweeping over the workers like a hawk scanning for prey. When the bell rings from the manor to signal day's end, you straighten slowly, feeling each vertebra complain in turn. Your legs are heavy, your knees mud-caked, and your hands feel like they've been carved from oak. As you head back toward the workers' hut, you pass the men from the morning again. They're quieter now, but their faces are hard, set against the knowledge that nothing they said today changed a thing. You catch one mutter, "We should just walk, see how the Lord fares without us." But his companion shakes his head. "They drag us back in irons." You've heard the stories. You have heard them. Of men branded for leaving their employer, of women jailed for refusing work at a fixed wage. Whether all of it's true, you can't say. Fear works just as well as fact in keeping people in line. That night, you lie on your pallet, the low murmur of other workers settling in for sleep around you. The air in the hut is thick with the smell of sweat, damp wool, and a faint hint of smoke. You stare up at the thatch and think about the law that says you're worth no more now than before the plague, even when half your neighbors are gone. Somewhere outside, an owl calls, its note low and mournful. You roll over, pulling the cloak tighter around you. Tomorrow will be the same. 6 pence, a day of bending your back, and the knowledge that no matter how empty the world feels, there's still no space for you to rise. The rooster's call comes late, or maybe it's just that the sky refuses to lighten. You wake to a dull, colorless morning that feels like it's been waiting for you to open your eyes so it can hand you another day. Your breath clouds in the cold air of the hut, and you can hear a few of the others stirring. Boots scraping the floor, a cough muffled into a sleeve. Today's work takes you closer to the village, where the manor's tenants sell their goods in a small market square. You're not here to buy much. 6 pence a week won't stretch far, but you're curious to see what's changed since the plague rolled through. The market is smaller than you remember. Only a handful of stalls line the muddy space, their canvas awnings sagging under a thin layer of last night's frost. You pass a woman selling onions, their papery skins flaking away like they're too tired to hold together. A man with a cart of salted fish stares at you from beneath the brim of his hat, his eyes sharp, calculating. You pause at a bread stall, the smell of yeast and ash mingling in the air. "A farthing for a loaf," the baker says, his voice flat, like he's already tired of bargaining. "A farthing?" you echo. "That's more than last month." He shrugs, and you can see the white dust of flour on his shoulders. Flour costs more, grain costs more, everything costs more. He's not wrong. You've heard whispers that in some towns prices have doubled since the plague, even tripled for things like meat and dairy. Fewer hands to sow and harvest means less food, and less food means more coin to get it. Historians still argue whether these price surges lasted decades or only a few hard years, but standing here with your 6 pence, it hardly matters. You can't afford to wait for the scholars to settle the debate. You hand over a coin and take the loaf. It's smaller than you'd like, the crust hard enough to crack a tooth, but it's food. At the next stall, you see a small miracle, a basket of apples, their skins red and glossy. You haven't tasted fresh fruit since last autumn. "How much?" you ask. The seller grins without humor. 2 farthings for one. You laugh before you can stop yourself. I could buy a week's worth of onions for that. Then buy onions, he says, turning to the next customer. You move on, the weight of the bread in your bag feeling both reassuring and disappointing. As you walk, you overhear snatches of conversation. Someone grumbling about the miller charging extra for grinding, another muttering that the Lord should sell off some of his own grain to feed the poor. A woman leans toward her companion, voice low but urgent. They say in the next shire folk have taken to stealing from the abbey's storehouse. The monks can't guard it all. The idea lodges in your mind, unwelcome but persistent. You've never stolen more than an apple as a child, but hunger is a persuasive tutor. A little further on, you pass a peddler selling cloth. It's coarse wool, the kind used for work tunics, and the prices make you wince. You finger the fabric, thinking of the mended patches in your own clothes. Too dear? The peddler asks. Unless you've a cheaper weave, he chuckles. Cheaper weave won't keep you warm. And what's the point of buying if it won't keep you warm? You leave the market with your single loaf of bread and the familiar feeling that you're always one step behind the price of living. On the road back to the fields, you pass a cottage with smoke curling from the chimney. The door opens, and an older man steps out, a small sack slung over his shoulder. He nods at you. Off to work? Aye. He leans on his walking stick. I worked for Lord Merton once, back before the pestilence. Paid me in coin and barley, enough to keep my family fed. Now, they expect you to take half the pay for twice the work. You nod, because it's easier than disagreeing. Guess we should be grateful there's work at all, he snorts. That's what they want you to think. Then he hobbles away, leaving you with the sour taste of truth in your mouth. By the time you reach the field, the morning has slipped into midday. You tear a small piece from your loaf, chew it slowly, and wash it down with a swallow from your flask. It's not much, but it will have to last until evening. The rest of the day passes in the rhythm of toil. Dig, lift, carry, repeat. You watch the others, their bodies moving with the same weary efficiency. A boy drops his load of kindling and curses softly under his breath. An older woman pauses to rub her hands, the joints swollen and red from cold. When the sun dips toward the horizon, you make your way back to the hut. Inside, the air is thick and warm from the press of bodies. Someone has managed to bring in a pot of thin stew, and you're lucky enough to get a ladleful. It's mostly broth, with a few lonely bits of turnip floating in it, but it's hot, and it smells faintly of thyme. As you eat, you think about the market, the prices that keep rising, the faces tight with worry, the way even the smallest pleasures now cost more than you can afford. You wonder how long you can keep feeding yourself on this wage, and what you'll do when the loaf you bought today is just a memory. In the dark, you hear someone's stomach growl, followed by a muffled laugh. It's the kind of laugh you make when you'd rather not cry. The next few days blur together, field work in the cold mornings, bread and ale at midday, the slow trudge back to the hut in the fading light. But on the fourth day, something changes. It happens on the edge of the Lord's far pasture, where the land slopes gently toward the river. You're sent there with 2 others, both older than you, to clear away brush and mend a section of the fence that's leaning drunkenly into the grass. The wood is damp, and as you lift a post back into place, you notice the land beyond. At first glance, it's nothing special, just a stretch of meadow dotted with a few half-rotted hayricks. But then you see it, the faint outline of a long abandoned path leading to a cluster of stone cottages. The roofs are sagging, and the walls are half swallowed by ivy. The place looks like it hasn't heard a human voice in years. One of your companions, a wiry man with deep lines carved into his face, catches you staring. "That's Whitcomb," he says, wiping his hands on his tunic. "Used to be a whole manor there. All gone now. All from the plague," he nods. "Lord shut it up after the last of them died. Land's been empty since." The other worker spits into the grass. "Empty land makes the lords nervous. Gives people ideas about squatting." You raise an eyebrow. "Has anyone tried?" "A few. Didn't end well." He doesn't elaborate, but the tone says enough. Historians still argue whether the years after the Black Death saw more peasants leaving their manors to seek better terms elsewhere, or whether fear of punishment kept most in place. Standing here, looking at Whitcomb, you can feel the temptation. The houses are right there, the fields beyond them thick with tall grass that would make fine pasture. You could almost see yourself living there, almost. Later that day, as you carry bundles of brush toward the edge of the field, you catch the faintest glimpse of movement near the abandoned cottages. A figure, just for a moment, ducking behind a wall. Too far to tell who it is, or if you even saw correctly. But it leaves a prickling at the back of your neck. On the walk back to the hut, you bring it up. "I think someone's living out there." The wiry man shrugs. "Could be. Could be your eyes playing tricks. Or maybe you just want to see someone take what you're too afraid to touch." He's not wrong. You tell yourself you wouldn't dare, not with the stories of what happens to squatters. But the thought doesn't leave you. That night, you lie awake listening to the low murmur of the others settling down, and you picture the abandoned cottages. No steward to watch over you, no fixed wage to tie you to a field, no Lord's tax collector knocking at your door. Just you, a patch of ground, and whatever you could coax from it. The next morning, you pass the market again on your way to the fields. The stalls are a little busier than last week, and a new seller has appeared, a man offering bundles of wool for sale. "From my own sheep," he says proudly, "on land my family's worked for 3 generations." You can't help but wonder how many of those generations would recognize the place now, with so much land lying fallow and so few hands to tend it. You buy nothing. Your loaf from yesterday is still half eaten, but you linger, listening. A woman at the wool stall says her cousins moved to another village, taking work for higher pay despite the statute. "They'll catch him," someone else says. They always do. The talk shifts to rumors of villages where the lords are offering land to anyone willing to work it, and of others where they're tightening their hold, locking up the barns and refusing to rent at any price. You file it away, unsure which is truth and which is just the wishful thinking of people who've had enough of bending their backs for too little. By late afternoon, you're back near Whitcomb again. The fence repair has brought you close enough to smell the damp in the air around the old cottages. This time, you're sure you see something. Smoke curling faintly from one of the chimneys. You glance at your companions, but they're busy with the fence. For a moment, you stand there, caught between the urge to walk over and the knowledge that doing so might end with you explaining yourself to the steward, or worse. Instead, You tuck the sight into your memory like a scrap of cloth saved for a day when you might need it. The sun is low when you finish for the day, and the air has that stillness that comes just before frost. As you head back, you pass a patch of thistles growing along the ditch, their dried seed heads rattling in the breeze. You remember your grandmother telling you how the seeds could be boiled to make a bitter tea that keeps sickness away. You're not sure it's true, but you make a note to gather some tomorrow just in case. The hut is warm when you arrive, and someone's managed to trade for a small jug of cider. It's thin, watery stuff, but it burns pleasantly in your throat. The cider loosens tongues, and soon the talk turns to land, who's working it, who's not, and whether any of you will ever see a patch of your own. You'd be surprised what a man can take if he's quiet enough, one of the older men says, his eyes glinting in the dim light. You think of Whitcomb again, of that wisp of chimney smoke curling into the evening air, and wonder how quiet you could be. 2 days later, you get your chance. It's not planned. You wake before the others, unable to shake a restless feeling that's been creeping into your bones since you first saw Whitcomb. The air inside the hut is close and heavy with the scent of bodies and damp wool, so you slip outside, boots crunching on the frost-silvered ground. The sky is a pale wash of color, the first hints of dawn creeping in from the east. A thin mist curls over the fields, blurring the world into soft edges. You take the long way to the pasture, your steps angled deliberately toward the old path you noticed before. No one's watching. Whitcomb's cottages loom ahead, their outlines growing sharper as you approach. They're even more ruined up close, stone walls buckled in places, beams jutting at odd angles like broken ribs. But the path is clear enough, and as you follow it into the cluster of buildings, you see fresh footprints in the mud. Not many, but enough to tell you that someone's been here recently. You pass a doorway where the wood has rotted away, revealing the skeleton of a house inside. A rusted pot lies half buried in the dirt, and a bird startles up from the rafters, flapping noisily into the morning air. Then you see the smoke. It's coming from the largest of the cottages, a squat structure with one wall still mostly intact and a patchwork of thatch clinging stubbornly to the roof. The smell reaches you, wood smoke and something else, faint but warm, like porridge. You're halfway to the doorway when a voice calls out. Hold there. It's a man's voice, low and rough, and it freezes you in place. A figure steps into the light spilling from the doorway, a broad-shouldered man with a patched cloak and a wary look in his eyes. He holds no weapon, but his posture says he's ready to grab a stone if he needs to. You raise your hand slightly. I'm just passing. Passing through an empty village. His eyes narrow. I work on the next manor over, saw the smoke. He studies you for a long moment, then jerks his head toward the cottage. Come on, then. No point talking out here where the wind carries everything. Inside, it's warmer than you expect. A small fire crackles in the hearth, and a battered pot hangs above it. The smell is stronger now. Grain porridge, thickened with something earthy. A woman sits on a low stool near the fire, stirring the pot. Her hair is streaked with gray, and she looks you over with the same cautious gaze as the man. This is Bram, she says, nodding toward the man. I'm Ellen, and before you ask, we've no wish for trouble. You shake your head. I'm not the steward's man. I've no reason to tell him you're here. Bram huffs. You say that now. But if he offers you a coin, he won't, you interrupt, surprising yourself with how certain you sound. Historians still argue whether squatting in abandoned villages was widespread after the plague or just a scattered phenomenon that left little trace in official records. Standing here, you can see why the truth is hard to pin down. No one living like this would want their presence noted. Ellen ladles porridge into a wooden bowl and hands it to you. It's plain, but hot, and you eat it gratefully. They tell you their story in pieces, how they'd worked another manor until the Lord raised the rent beyond what they could pay, how they drifted from place to place until they found Whitcomb. No one comes here, Ellen says, not unless they're lost or they're you. You glance around the cottage. It's not much, but it's shelter, and the fields outside are rich enough to grow something if a person's willing to put in the work. You wonder how long they've got before someone notices the smoke. On your way back to the manor, you turn over the encounter in your mind. There's risk in what Bram and Ellen are doing, but also freedom, something you haven't tasted in a long time. That night, as you lie on your pallet, the hut feels smaller, the air thicker. You picture the cottage again, its firelight flickering against stone walls, and you wonder what it would take to live there yourself. The next day, work takes you far from Whitcomb, down to the river meadows, where a team is dredging silt to clear the water flow. The air smells of mud and rot, and your boots sink into the soft ground with every step. Somewhere nearby, a heron croaks, sounding like a hinge in need of oil. The steward comes by to check the work, his face pinched against the cold. He barks orders at a few men, then pulls you aside. "You've been wandering further than usual," he says. You keep your face blank. "Only where the work takes me." He studies you for a beat too long, then nods and moves on. You let out a slow breath, not sure whether to feel relieved or more nervous. As the sun sets, you spot a chunk of pottery half buried in the mud, a shard painted with a faded blue pattern. You tuck it into your pouch, not for any real reason, except that it feels like a small claim, a piece of something forgotten that's now yours. Back at the hut, the men are talking about an upcoming church feast day, one of the few breaks in the endless cycle of work. A feast means ale, bread, maybe even meat, if the Lord's feeling generous. You join in the laughter, but your mind is elsewhere, on the smoke curling above Whitcomb, on the taste of plain porridge eaten in quiet, and on the idea that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to stay here forever. The feast day arrives with a strange kind of electricity in the air. You wake to the sound of bells, their peals muffled by distance but still carrying a note of urgency, or maybe just anticipation. The others in the hut are already moving, pulling on cleaner shirts, shaking the dust from cloaks that haven't been worn since Easter. The air smells faintly of damp wool and the sharp tang of wood smoke drifting in from the manor's main hall. Someone's cooking early, which is either a good sign or a terrible one, depending on whether you're near the front of the serving line. By mid-morning, the manor green is bustling. Tables have been dragged out from the hall, their surfaces already laden with trenchers of coarse bread, bowls of cabbage stew, and a few glorious cuts of pork. The scent is heavy and rich, and your stomach growls loud enough to earn a laugh from the man beside you. The steward stands near the head table, hands clasped behind his back, watching as the Lord himself makes a brief appearance, more a formality than anything. He says a few words about loyalty and God's grace, then retreats inside, leaving the steward to manage the actual distribution. You line up with the rest, bowl in hand, and when your turn comes, you're given a ladle of stew and a chunk of bread. It's not much, but the warmth of it seeps into you as you sit on the grass and eat. Someone starts a song, and others join in, the melody rising and falling with the wind. It's a bawdy tune about a miller's daughter and a traveling friar, light enough to get a few chuckles, though a passing friar frowns as he hears it. Historians still argue whether these small feasts after the plague were more generous than before, or simply more noticeable because they broke up the grim monotony of survival. Looking around now, you think it might not matter. Generosity is relative when most days are just gruel and hard labor. A few merchants have come to take advantage of the crowd, setting up stalls along the edge of the green. Their goods are modest: spools of thread, carved wooden spoons, a scattering of bright ribbons. One man has a small box of painted badges, each one bearing a saint's image. You finger the coins in your pouch. It's not much, but you hand over a penny for a badge of St. Roch, patron of plague victims, according to the merchant. He claims it will keep you safe from sickness, though his tone suggests he's said the same to everyone today. With the badge pinned to your cloak, you wander toward the ale casks. The drink is thin, but it loosens tongues, and soon you're swapping stories with a group of older men about strange sights in the countryside, phantom lights in the forest, a well that runs red after rain. One man swears he saw a cow give birth to a lamb. The others roar with laughter, but he just shrugs and says, stranger things have happened. By mid-afternoon, the air is thick with the smell of spilled ale, trampled grass, and roasting meat. A wrestling match starts near the edge of the green, drawing a small crowd. You watch as two men, both flushed and grinning, grapple in the dirt, the onlookers shouting encouragement or mockery depending on their allegiances. Somewhere behind you, a fiddler strikes up a tune, and a few couples begin to dance, their steps uneven but spirited. You can't help but smile. For a moment, the hunger and cold and constant labor fade into the background, replaced by the warm hum of human noise. It's only when the sun dips low that the steward begins shooing people away. Those from further afield start the long walk home, their laughter carrying into the evening. You linger a little longer, picking up a stray scrap of pork rind from an abandoned trencher before heading back toward the hut. On the path, you pass a small group of children chasing each other, one holding a stick like a scepter, declaring himself king of the feast. The others laugh and pretend to bow. You wonder if they even remember the plague, or if for them this strange, pared-down version of life is all they've ever known. By the time you reach your pallet, the air is cool again, and the quiet settles heavy around you. The feast was a brief spark, a reminder of what life could be. But as you lie down, the crackle of Whitcomb's unseen fire comes to mind again, and you feel that restless itch return. It's one thing to enjoy a few stolen hours of abundance. It's another to wonder whether you could claim them for yourself, not just once a year, but every day. By morning, the badge of St. Roch glints faintly in the dim light seeping through the thatch, a reminder of the quiet bargains you make with yourself. Protection costs a penny, but fear? That's free and plentiful. Your grandmother is already awake, her thin fingers deftly knotting a length of red thread around a small, dried clove of garlic. She mutters under her breath, half prayer, half something older. She catches you watching and gives you that look, the one that says don't question it. You've learned better than to scoff. The air outside is damp, the kind of morning where mist hangs low, making the hedgerows look like shadows crouched close to the earth. You pass a neighbor sprinkling salt across his threshold before heading to the fields. He swears it keeps sickness out, though the last time you saw him do it, his wife took to her bed with a fever. Still, he hasn't stopped. Historians still argue whether these superstitions spread faster after the Black Death or simply became more visible, like weeds thriving in a field left untended. When the church's answers feel distant and abstract, you reach for whatever scraps of control you can find. A woman in the lane waves you over, holding a small pouch of herbs, rosemary, sage, and something bitter you can't name. She tells you to keep it tied to your belt so the bad airs won't cling to you. It's the same miasma theory you've heard the parish priest rail against. But when she presses the bundle into your hand, it's warm from her palm, and you find yourself nodding thanks. There's a charm scratched into the wooden post at the smithy, 2 interlocking circles, half worn away by rain. The smith says it was there before his father's time, left by someone who knew the old marks that keep evil from crossing the doorway. You catch yourself touching it as you pass, just in case. At the market, a toothless peddler offers a jar of something he calls plague paste, a foul-smelling mash of garlic, vinegar, and, if his wink means anything, ground-up frog. He insists you smear it on your chest before bed. You don't buy it, but you file it away in the growing catalog of odd remedies people swear by. The thing is, it's not just about the plague anymore. With winters biting hard, harvests failing, and rumors of other illnesses drifting in from the ports, people want to believe they can build walls against the unseen. A sprig of holly above the door, a pinch of ash in the bread dough, a whispered phrase before stepping over a threshold, it's all part of the same quiet ritual of survival. And sometimes, superstition isn't entirely separate from the church. The parish priest blesses the well once a year, sprinkling holy water and chanting Latin verses. But last winter, you caught him slipping a small stone into the bucket, a stone painted with a cross and a crude eye. You never mentioned it. Walking home, you see a child tracing shapes in the mud with a stick. Her voice sing-song as she repeats a rhyme about keeping the bone man away. You ask her where she learned it, and she points to her older brother, who grins and says, "Everyone knows that one." You don't, but you hum the tune under your breath anyway. There's comfort in these strange habits, even when you suspect they're nonsense. It's like carrying a lantern through fog. Not enough to see where you're going, but enough to feel you're not walking blind. And on nights when the wind rattles the shutters and the fire burns low, you find your hand resting on the St. Roch badge without thinking. The line between faith and fear blurs here just as it has for years. And you wonder if, long after the memory of plague fades, the charms and marks and whispered rhymes will still cling to the edges of life, stubborn as ivy on old stone. The rain begins before dawn, a slow tapping on the thatch that becomes a steady patter by the time you push yourself up from the straw mattress. The air smells of damp earth and cold ash from the fire that went out hours ago. Your toes curl against the packed dirt floor, and you glance instinctively at the roof beams, counting the dark patches where water seeps through. A droplet lands squarely on your shoulder. You shift your weight, and the bench creaks, the sound swallowed quickly by the muffled hush of the storm outside. This is what a home means for most like you after the plague. Walls of wattle and daub patched with whatever you could scavenge. A roof that lets in the sky when the wind pushes hard enough. You share this one-room space with your family, every possession visible from where you stand, the low bed frame with its sagging ropes, the wooden chest that doubles as a stool, the chipped cup that once belonged to your grandfather. It's not much, but you can name every nail and knot in the timber, every stain on the wall from a winter long past. Historians still argue whether housing for the poor truly improved in the decades after the Black Death. Some say the labor shortage meant better wages, which meant better homes. But here, the truth seeps in with the rain. Wages might rise, yet wood still rots, and thatch still needs replacing. Your neighbor Willem is luckier. He's been salvaging roof tiles from an abandoned manor 2 villages over. You pass him in the lane, and he boasts about the tiles being nearly whole despite the moss. You imagine the smug satisfaction of lying under something that doesn't drip on your face at night. Inside your own cottage, you've tried all the tricks, stuffing old rags into the cracks, wedging flat stones under the rafters to hold the reed bundles tighter, even rubbing sheep's tallow into the thatch edges to keep water from seeping through. None of it works for long. When the wind changes, the leak finds a new path. Your grandmother tells you to be grateful. It's worse for those still living in huts with turf roofs. She recalls a winter when a storm stripped the roof clean off, and they slept under a cart until spring. You believe her, but that doesn't make the damp patches on your blanket any less cold. There's a smell you can't quite name, somewhere between mildew and wet wool. It clings to everything, even your skin. When you wake in the night, it's there, reminding you that comfort is something the rich can afford to buy while you try to barter for scraps of it. Still, you make do. The leaking corner becomes a place to set a bucket for collecting rainwater, useful for washing. The damp smell fades a little when you hang rosemary bunches from the rafters. And when the fire is lit, the steam rising from drying clothes can almost be mistaken for warmth. Sometimes, in summer, the roof feels like a blessing, cool, with the wind slipping through enough to keep the air from turning sour. But the winters undo all of that kindness. You lie awake, listening to the creak of beams in the wind, wondering which morning you'll wake to find the roof bowing under the weight of snow. A quirky thing you've learned: mice find their way into the thatch. You hear them scurrying overhead at night, little claws clicking on reed stems. You'd think they'd be a nuisance, and they are, but oddly, their nests can make the roof warmer in winter. Not that you'd thank them out loud. When you pass the manor house on your way to the fields, you notice how its roof tiles gleam even in the gray rain, the lines straight and unbroken. No drips, no buckets under the eaves. You tell yourself that one day maybe your children will sleep without the sound of rain inside the house. But for now, you shift the bucket, pull the blanket tighter, and watch the drops fall one by one, a slow, steady reminder that shelter here is never perfect, just enough to keep most of the weather out, most of the time. By the time spring turns, you can already feel the hunger waiting on the horizon. The fields outside the village wear the pale green fuzz of young shoots but you've lived through enough bad years to know that looks can deceive. The plague took more than lives. It broke the rhythm of planting and harvest. Too many hands gone meant too many fields left fallow, and the soil doesn't forgive neglect easily. Your stomach reminds you before your mind does. A thin morning porridge, stretched with more water than oats, sits heavy but unsatisfying. It's what you've been eating for days now, ever since the grain sacks began to shrink faster than you'd hoped. Historians still argue whether famine truly worsened after the Black Death, or if the scarcity simply became more visible. For you, there's nothing abstract about it. The bread is smaller, the loaves more hollow, and every crumb is accounted for. The markets feel tense in these times. You walk between stalls where the bakers' faces are drawn tight, and the prices scrawled on slates change from morning to evening. You hear mutters about a shipment of rye that spoiled on the road, about barns where the damp crept in and turned the grain black. In the tavern, a man tells you of a year when desperate villagers ground acorns into meal, just to keep something in their bellies. The bread it made was bitter, he says, and turned their mouths raw. You make a mental note to keep an eye on the oak groves, just in case. The air in the village seems sharper in times like these. Every sniff of someone else's dinner more noticeable. Every whiff of roasting meat from the manor kitchens a little stab in the ribs. You catch yourself staring too long at the chickens scratching in the yard, wondering if anyone would notice if one went missing. Then you think of the penalties, of the stocks in the square, and your hands stay in your pockets. Hunger's bad, but shame in front of the whole village is worse. Oddly enough, the plague years brought a few strange food habits that still linger. Some people swear by boiled nettles, calling them green gold. They're prickly to pick, but in your mouth they taste vaguely like spinach and hope. And you know a woman who mixes them with onion to make a soup that at least smells like a feast. The children feel it most. You see it in their faces, cheeks losing their roundness, eyes a little more tired than they should be. When the weather turns foul, their coughs hang in the air like the smell of damp wool. You try to save the last dried apples for them, tucking them away in a cloth bag like treasures. And then there's the grain tithe. You watch men with scales measure out what each household owes, the sacks of wheat and rye hauled away in carts. They say it's for the upkeep of the parish, for the good of all. But you can't help wondering how much of it ends up in the Lord's pantry. You work the fields harder in these months, trying to coax every grain from the soil. Your back aches, your nails stay rimmed with dirt, but you push on. Because when famine walks in, it doesn't knock first. It just takes a seat at your table and waits. At night, the dreams come. You dream of long tables piled with roasted birds and fresh bread, the butter melting before your eyes. Then you wake to the same rough crust, the same thin broth. The contrast feels like a cruel joke, but it's one you've learned to swallow without complaint. You tell yourself that next harvest will be better, that the rains will come at the right time, the sun will stay gentle, and no sickness will creep through the crops. You tell yourself these things because it's easier than thinking about what happens if you're wrong. The truth is, after the Black Death, famine didn't need to be as deadly to feel dangerous. You've already seen how quickly the world can tilt, how easily a full granary can become an empty one. And so you guard your portion, measure your meals, and keep your eyes on the fields, because they're the only thing standing between you and the gnawing emptiness. The day the tax collector arrives, you can hear him before you see him. The steady clop of hooves on the frozen dirt road carries across the still morning air, followed by the faint jingle of metal coins in a pouch that isn't yours. You've learned to recognize that sound like a distant reminder that even in lean years, someone else's purse can still be full. He rides into the village in a fine cloak lined with fur, the kind of warmth you'd trade 2 months' wages for. His horse's hooves spray flecks of mud onto boots that have never had to stand in a flooded field. You watch from your doorway, knowing that soon he'll knock, and that whatever he takes will make the coming week that much tighter. They say taxes are for the good of the realm, roads, defense, the upkeep of the crown. Historians still argue whether the post-Black Death tax hikes were truly necessary or simply the Lord's trying to squeeze more from fewer workers. You don't need the debate. You see the truth in the hollowness of your pantry after his visit. The collector keeps a ledger, a thick book bound in leather that smells faintly of mold. Your name is in there, inked neatly beside a number that feels far larger than it should. You imagine how many of these numbers he'll collect before the sun sets, and how many families will be left scraping the bottom of the pot tonight. Sometimes the taxes come in coin, sometimes in kind. This year, it's grain, your grain. You measure it out under his watchful eye, the scale creaking slightly as it tips. "A little more," he says, tapping the side of the sack with his gloved hand. You obey because it's not worth the argument. The cruelest part? You know the grain is worth more now than it was before the plague. Fewer farmers mean less harvest, which means higher prices. Your loss is someone else's tidy profit, and the collectors aren't the only ones sniffing around. The church takes its tithe too, 10% of whatever you have, because your soul, they remind you, needs tending as much as your body. You give it willingly enough, though not without the quiet thought that God might understand if you kept a little extra this year. On the road home from handing over your due, you pass the manor. Through the high windows, you glimpse candlelight and hear the faint hum of music. A feast, perhaps. Roasted meat, wine. You imagine the lords leaning back in their chairs, bellies full, discussing how the village has bounced back nicely since the pestilence. One of your neighbors once told you of a trick his uncle tried, hiding a portion of grain in the rafters before the collector came. It worked until the rats found it first. Now the tale is passed along as a warning. You can hide from the tax man, but not from the hunger that follows. Still, there are quiet rebellions. You've seen smaller portions weighed out when the scales are tipped just so, or a sack of grain passed hand to hand under the cover of night. Not enough to change the balance, but enough to make a meal or two stretch further. Oddly, the collectors seem to walk a fine line. They push, but not too hard. Even they know that desperate people can become dangerous. Memories of the peasants' revolt still linger in the minds of the ruling class, like a scar that never quite heals. When the collector finally leaves, his horse's hooves fading into the distance, the village exhales. You watch him disappear down the road, your own belly feeling a little emptier than before. And yet, you know he'll be back. He always comes back. Taxes after the Black Death aren't just about money. They're about reminding you where you stand. You may have survived the pestilence, but survival still comes with a bill. You first hear it while stooping in the field, your hands deep in the soil, loosening weeds around the early shoots. A low murmur, not the wind, but voices carrying from the edge of the pasture. At first it's just two men talking. Then another joins, and another. The hum builds like the soft gathering of bees before they swarm. You keep your head down, but your ears tilt toward the sound. It starts with complaints. Wages too low, hours too long, rents too high. That's nothing new. You've been hearing those since before the plague. But today, there's a different edge to it, a tone that sharpens like a whetstone against a blade. They're not just lamenting the unfairness of it all. They're talking about doing something. One man, broad-shouldered, with a missing tooth, mentions that the lords have grown fat on the work of too few hands. Another says the king is too far away to care. You sense something shifting in the air. It's dangerous, this talk. After the pestilence, the statute of laborers chained wages to what they were before, as though time itself could be stopped. And yet, here you are, working more, earning less, feeding those above you more generously than you feed your own children. Historians still argue whether this restlessness was inevitable after the Black Death, or if it was sparked by a few bold souls in the right place at the wrong time. But to you, it feels as natural as breathing. The plague took so many. Why should the survivors not claim a better life? Of course, not everyone's on board. Some glance over their shoulders, muttering warnings about the gallows, about what happens to those who stir trouble. The memory of past punishments lingers like the smell of tallow smoke in a cottage after a bad winter. But others stand taller as the conversation flows. A name is spoken, Wat Tyler. You've never met him, but you've heard whispers. A man with ideas. A man who says things that make you wonder why you've been bowing your head all these years. One evening, while mending a tunic by the fire, your cousin leans in and tells you about a meeting in the next village. They're talking about marching, he says, voice low. Not just here, everywhere, London even. You glance toward the shuttered window, imagining the road that leads there. It's a long way for weary feet, but the thought sends a small current through your chest. In the days that follow, the murmurs grow louder. A shepherd refuses to hand over his extra wool to the manor steward. A miller quietly lowers his grinding fee for friends, muttering that the lords can make up the difference. These aren't grand rebellions, but they're cracks in the dam. And yet, there's tension in the air, thick enough to taste. You find yourself speaking more cautiously, choosing who you trust before letting words slip. There are always those willing to trade information for favor. The steward, you've noticed, asks more questions than usual these days. Still, the pull is there. This feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Not through prayer alone, but through hands, feet, and voices moving together. The idea is intoxicating, like the first strong ale after a week of thin broth. One afternoon, you walk past the tavern and see a small knot of villagers bent over the table. A rough map of the region is scratched into the wood with a piece of charcoal. Lines and marks show manors, towns, and roads. You linger just long enough to catch the words meeting place and signal. Then the tavern keeper spots you and shoos you on. By night, you lie in your bed, listening to the creak of the rafters, wondering if you'll soon be walking beside your neighbors. Pitchfork in hand, voices raised toward something bigger than survival. You're not sure if it's courage you feel or fear, maybe both. But you know the whispers won't stay whispers for long. The marketplace feels heavier now, like the very air presses down on your shoulders. You weave through the stalls, each one shouting louder than the last, "Fresh eggs, fine cheese, good wool." But your eyes catch only the empty pockets of those who buy. Coin is tighter than ever, and the fear of the future makes even the best deals seem like luxuries. After the Black Death, the poor faced more than just hunger and harsh landlords. They grappled with the collapse of community structures. Guilds that once regulated trades and supported workers dwindled, and with fewer apprentices and journeymen, the skills you'd hoped to pass on felt at risk of vanishing. You hear the smith mutter under his breath about how hard it is to find good help, how even the apprentices who remain can barely afford their tools or meals. This loss of craftsmanship is more than economic. It's the slow erosion of identity, the feeling that the world you knew is slipping through your fingers like dust. Historians still argue about whether the plague permanently disrupted the social fabric or if these changes simply paved the way for new opportunities. You lean more toward the first. It feels like your neighbors drift further apart with every passing year. The shared meals and festivals become scarcer, replaced by quiet suspicion and private struggles. Yet, amid this fracture, small pockets of solidarity persist. At the tailor's shop, you notice a group pooling scraps of fabric to make patchwork clothes for children who outgrow their garments too quickly. It's a small kindness, but in this time, kindness feels like rebellion. You remember the stories your mother told about the saints and their miracles, and you wonder if you'll ever see miracles in your own life, or just hard work and small victories. The church remains a fixture in the village, but its hold is weaker, fraying at the edges as fewer attend regularly and more question what prayers actually accomplish. At the tavern, old songs about knights and chivalry give way to ballads about hardship and resilience, sung quietly by tired voices. You join in sometimes, the melodies a thread connecting you to something larger than yourself, even if just for a moment. Quirkily, you've noticed that the plague seems to have inspired a sudden fascination with herbal remedies. The local healer carries strange bottles filled with roots and leaves, claiming they can cure everything from a fever to a broken heart. You're skeptical, but secretly grateful when a sprig of lavender tucked in your pillow soothes your restless nights. In these days, trust is currency as valuable as gold. You find yourself watching your back more often, wary of strangers bearing smiles or too many questions. The bonds of community may be stretched thin, but you cling to what remains, because alone the world feels far colder. Despite everything, hope lingers in the smallest gestures. A shared loaf, a helping hand, a smile in passing. The harsh truth is that life after the Black Death is grueling and uncertain, but it is not without moments of light. You carry on because to stop is to surrender, and surrender is not yet an option. The seasons continue their endless cycle, indifferent to the weight of your struggles. Winter's chill gives way to spring's tentative warmth, and with it, a strange mixture of dread and cautious hope. The land around you has healed in places. The grass grows greener, the trees blossom, but the scars beneath the surface remain. After the Black Death, labor shortages gave surviving peasants more leverage. You've heard the stories. Some were able to demand better wages or even move to new lands where their work was scarce and therefore more valued. But for many, including you, those gains are fragile, shadowed by harsh laws designed to keep things as they were. You watch neighbors argue quietly over labor contracts, their voices hushed as if the very walls have ears. The statute of laborers looms over the land like a specter, limiting wages and mobility with the threat of punishment. It's a game of cat and mouse, trying to find ways to survive within the confines of these restrictions. Historians still debate how effective these laws truly were, or if they simply pushed peasants into subtler forms of resistance. From your vantage point, the laws seem like chains disguised as protection, a way to keep power firmly in the hands of those who have always held it. On the bright side, you notice subtle changes. Some manors begin to offer small perks, better food, lighter chores, to keep skilled workers from slipping away. Others invest in new farming techniques, hoping to squeeze more from the land with fewer hands. You hear whispers of 3-field crop rotation and improved plows that could change the rhythm of planting and harvest. Yet change brings its own challenges. With new tools and methods come new skills to learn, and sometimes old ways are lost. Your father grumbles about the strange machines that rattle across the fields, swearing the land used to talk to us better. At home, the children grow a little stronger, their cheeks filling out as food becomes a bit more reliable. But you know the fragile balance can tip with a single bad harvest or a fresh illness. You tuck them in each night, murmuring hopes for a better tomorrow. In the village square, the markets start to bustle again, though never quite like before. You haggle for vegetables and wool, noticing how the prices ebb and flow like a tide you're barely able to swim in. The Lord Steward keeps a keen eye, reminding everyone that debts must be paid and obligations met. Quirkily, some have taken to wearing charms and talismans, small tokens to ward off evil or illness. You find it amusing, this blend of superstition and faith, but secretly you tuck a bit of iron in your pocket, just in case. The church, for all its struggles, remains a cornerstone. The new priests preach about resilience and renewal, their voices a balm on weary souls. You attend services when you can, drawn by the familiar rituals, even if doubts cloud your heart. You've survived the worst of the Black Death shadow, but life is no longer the simple, predictable cycle it once was. It is a tightrope walk between hope and despair, between tradition and change, between survival and something like thriving. And though the path forward is uncertain, you keep stepping, one weary foot in front of the other, into a world still trying to find its footing after the storm. The village wakes slowly to the sounds of early morning, the cawing of crows perched on bare branches, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft shuffle of feet on frost-hardened earth. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter around your shoulders and step outside, the chill biting at your skin like a reminder that the world hasn't yet warmed to your troubles. After the Black Death, many surviving villagers found their relationships with landlords shifting, though not always in ways that favored you. You remember when your father was bound to the manor by custom and law, forced to provide labor regardless of the harvest's success. Now, those old ties seem stretched thinner, but new burdens emerge. The lords, eager to maintain their income, have begun to negotiate contracts rather than demand rigid servitude. It sounds better on paper, terms, agreements, wages, but you know from whispers and wary glances that the reality is often less generous. There are always loopholes, penalties for missed days, and clauses that shift risk back onto your shoulders. Historians still argue whether this change was a step toward freedom or simply a reshuffling of obligations under a different name. For you, it feels like a delicate dance. Sometimes a little more room to breathe. Sometimes a tightening noose disguised as a contract. The village steward passes by, his gaze sharp as ever, noting who works harder and who lags behind. Rumors swirl that some peasants have taken to borrowing money from local moneylenders, an expensive habit that traps families in cycles of debt. You've heard stories of those who lose their small plots entirely, swallowed up by debts they never imagined. Yet, amidst the hardship, small acts of defiance and adaptation brighten the days. You see women organizing communal baking, pooling scarce resources to stretch what little flour they have. Men share tools and labor, trading favors in silent agreements. There's even talk of traveling craftsmen offering new skills and ideas, promising better tools and techniques, though at a price. You watch a blacksmith demonstrate a new type of plowshare, its gleaming iron catching the sunlight like a promise of change. You wonder if this will be the dawn you've been waiting for. Quirkily, you notice a sudden craze for folk tales and storytelling, as if the village is searching for meaning and escape through words. Around fires at night, elders recount legends of heroes past, their voices weaving magic into the cold air. The church bell tolls in the distance, a steady reminder of faith and routine, even as doubt lingers in the hearts of many. You attend services sporadically now, more for the company than conviction, but the rituals still offer a thread to hold on to in a world unraveling. You finish your morning chores, the earth rough beneath your nails, the sun climbing higher. Despite the many shadows still cast by the Black Death, you can sense faint glimmers of resilience, small sparks that refuse to be extinguished. You trudge on, knowing that survival is just the first chapter of a longer story, one you're determined to live through, come what may. The sound of children laughing is a rare, precious thing now, a fragile bloom amid the hardships you face. You watch the youngest ones chase each other through the muddy lanes, their bare feet kicking up wet earth, oblivious to the weight their parents carry. For them, the world is still wide and full of possibility, even if yours feels like a constant battle. After the Black Death, the village's population is smaller, but the birth rate is starting to climb again. You know every child born carries hope and a burden. Fewer hands mean more work for those left, and raising children takes resources you can barely spare. You recall the stories of midwives and herbal healers, their hands both revered and feared. Some swear that the plague's return was linked to women's whispered secrets and strange concoctions. Historians still debate the role of these healers. Were they saviors or scapegoats? But you've seen the comfort a simple poultice brings, the calm a quiet voice offers in the dark. The church tries to assert its role, promoting baptisms and blessings as safeguards against evil. Still, faith feels complicated now, more a social glue than a personal conviction. You've heard priests speak of plague as divine punishment, a narrative that's hard to swallow when you know the rich and powerful suffered less. Education is a rare luxury. You hear that some children of merchants and minor nobles attend small schools, learning to read Latin and basic arithmetic. For village children like yours, knowledge is mostly practical. How to mend a fence, tend a crop, or care for animals. One day, a traveling scholar arrives carrying books and strange devices. He offers to teach reading and writing for a price, promising that knowledge might be a way out of poverty. The idea intrigues you, but it also feels distant, like a star too far to reach. Despite the hardships, you see the beginnings of change. The plague has fractured old hierarchies, creating gaps where new ideas and opportunities might take root. Some villagers begin to question traditions, quietly challenging the status quo in hushed conversations. Quirkily, you notice a trend of small charms worn by children, a carved piece of wood or a bit of colored thread, believed to protect against sickness. It's a superstition passed down through generations, but you secretly find comfort in these tokens, as if their magic might just be real. The passing seasons remind you that life continues, relentless and indifferent. You tuck your children in, whispering stories of resilience and courage, hoping they'll grow strong enough to face the uncertain future. And as you close your eyes, the village hums softly around you, a tapestry woven from loss, hope, and the enduring human spirit. The village graveyard lies quiet under a pale morning sky, dew still clinging to the grass like tiny jewels. You wander slowly among the weathered stones, some cracked with age, others barely holding names carved long ago. The air feels heavy, thick with silence and the weight of memories. It's impossible to ignore how the Black Death has transformed this place. Graves that once were few have multiplied like wildflowers after a storm. You feel the weight of loss here more deeply than anywhere else. The plague's toll was staggering, wiping out entire families, neighbors, friends. Yet in the weeks, months, and years afterward, how people faced death changed just as dramatically. Where funerals had once been communal celebrations of life, with shared food, prayers, and stories, they now often became rushed, somber affairs. Fear of contagion still lingers in the air. Villagers keep their distance, hastening burials, sometimes without even seeing the body. Historians still argue whether this shift in mourning practices permanently altered the way communities grieve. Was it a temporary adaptation to terrifying circumstances, or the beginning of a more private, individualized approach to death? For you, it feels like a loneliness that never quite lifts, a quiet void where the heart of the village once beat loudest. The churchyard itself has changed. You notice new kinds of grave markers, simple wooden crosses, rough stones, sometimes no marker at all. Elaborate tombstones have become a luxury few can afford after the devastation. People turn to more modest ways to honor the dead, planting trees or flowers near graves as living memorials. These quiet tributes grow slowly, witnesses to both loss and resilience. Yet the church tries to fill the void with prayers, sermons, and rituals designed to soothe the living. Attendance waxes and wanes. Some cling tightly to faith, hoping it will protect them from further tragedy. Others feel abandoned, their doubts deepening as they wonder why the plague came at all. The tension between belief and despair is palpable in whispered conversations after Mass. You recall the eerie sight of plague crosses, wooden markers erected at village boundaries, or plague-stricken homes to warn travelers and isolate the sick. Superstition wrapped tightly around these crosses. Some say that laying a hand on a plague cross brought protection. Others claim they're cursed spots where restless spirits wander. At night, children dare each other to approach these markers, daring to touch what feels like the thin veil between life and death. Life in the fields continues, though the scars of the past years show everywhere. Abandoned plots are slowly being worked again. Sheep and cattle grazed cautiously. The survivors, you included, carry a weight heavier than before. Not just physical labor, but the burden of memories, grief, and uncertainty. Every planting season is a quiet gamble. Will the crops flourish or fail? Will the village have enough food this year? Despite hardships, signs of renewal peek through. Young couples marry quietly, determined to build new families even in the shadow of loss. Births are celebrated with cautious hope. Children who survived in smaller numbers become treasures beyond measure. These moments of joy act as tiny flickers of light in the darkness, small proof that life persists. In the village square, you hear talk of evolving customs around death. Some families now hold annual memorial feasts, gathering to remember lost loved ones with shared meals and stories. These gatherings blend sorrow with celebration, binding the community closer. Quirkily, you notice how certain local plants like rosemary and lavender have taken on new significance. They're planted near graves and worn as tokens to ward off evil spirits and illness. Whether these practices have true protective power or are comforting superstition, they reveal a community's deep need for hope and control amid chaos. Travelers passing through share stories of other villages where people perform dances around graves or leave small trinkets for the dead. These customs inspire your village to experiment with its own ways of remembrance, mixing the old with the new. The wandering minstrels who once seemed a mere distraction now carry something deeper. Songs of loss and survival, woven into ballads that echo the collective heartache of the times. Their music offers an emotional release and a means to pass on stories that might otherwise fade. At night, you often lie awake, listening to the distant hoot of owls or the rustle of leaves. Sometimes, memories of lost friends and family drift through your mind, mingling with the gentle night sounds. The village sleeps uneasily, caught between mourning and the stubborn will to live. You rise from the graveyard with a heavy but steady heart. The past may not be forgotten, but it is not allowed to crush the present. You step back into the living world, carrying the stories and strength of those who came before. In their memory, you continue. The morning sun casts long golden rays across the village square, warming the worn cobblestones beneath your feet. You step into the market, a lively but cautious gathering place that has slowly come back to life after the horrors of the Black Death. The air carries a complex mix of scents, freshly baked bread, fragrant herbs, and the earthy aroma of livestock, mingling with the faint, lingering scent of smoke from chimneys. This marketplace is a testament to the resilience of your community, a place where survival and hope intertwine. The market buzzes with activity, but it's a different rhythm than before. There are fewer stalls than in days past, yet the vendors who remain display their goods with pride. You see farmers selling baskets of root vegetables and bundles of herbs, while weavers lay out swatches of cloth, their colors muted but still vibrant against the morning light. Merchants from neighboring towns bring spices and tools, reminders that the wider world is still out there, even if travel feels more dangerous now. You find yourself drawn to a vendor who is selling wool and yarn, goods made valuable by the increased demand for warm clothing in the colder months. The sheep population, once decimated by plague and neglect, is beginning to rebound, thanks in part to villagers determined to restore their livelihoods. A weaver nearby demonstrates the careful art of spinning thread, her fingers moving deftly despite the chill in the air. Historians still argue about the economic impact of the Black Death. Some say it ushered in the end of feudalism, while others believe it merely slowed its decline. But standing here, watching the markets ebb and flow, you feel the shift in power. Labor is scarce, and peasants like you have more bargaining power than ever before. Wages have risen in response to the shortage of workers, allowing many to negotiate better terms for their labor or even consider moving to towns in search of new opportunities. You overhear a heated conversation between two farmers debating whether to lease more land from the local lord or try to work collectively with neighbors to manage abandoned fields. There is an air of cautious optimism, but also uncertainty. Everyone understands that the social order is in flux. Landowners, once firmly in control, grumble about rising wages and the loss of their traditional privileges, but they have little choice but to adapt. The market isn't just a place to trade goods. It's a social hub where news travels faster than the plague ever could. Travelers share stories from distant villages, tales of new outbreaks, or the latest royal edicts. These stories fuel lively debates about the future, the role of the church, and whether the world will ever return to how it was. Yet, beneath the surface, suspicion and fear linger. Refugees and outsiders are met with wary eyes. Rumors swirl that some carry disease or bring bad luck. You notice groups clustering tightly, protective of their own, wary of anyone who looks or speaks differently. Old prejudices die hard, even in times of shared hardship. Quirkily, you spot a stall selling dried toads, snakeskins, and strange herbs, ingredients for folk remedies believed to ward off illness. The line between the science and superstition blurs here as people clutch anything that promises protection. The air smells faintly of lavender and rosemary, plants newly treasured not just for their fragrance, but for their supposed healing powers. Children weave through the crowd, their laughter a bright contrast to the adults' cautious conversations. They play games mimicking the trades they see, pretending to be merchants or blacksmiths, offering a glimpse of life's ongoing cycle. Their energy reminds you that despite the darkness, the future still belongs to those too young to remember the worst. The church bell rings, calling everyone to midday prayers. The faith of your village is complex. Some find comfort in ritual, others wrestle with doubt after all they've endured. The plague tested beliefs, leaving many questioning why such suffering was allowed. Yet here, in this market, faith persists in whispers, gestures, and moments of silent reflection. As the day wears on, the market begins to wind down. Vendors pack up their stalls, and villagers head home, their baskets filled with the fruits of hard labor and cautious hope. The scars of the Black Death remain visible in empty homes, in the quiet absence of lost loved ones, and in the careful way people live their lives. But the market's pulse tells you that life endures. You leave the square carrying not just goods, but a deeper understanding of the world reborn from ashes. The Black Death changed everything, society, economy, belief. But it did not stop the flow of life. It reminds you that resilience is woven into the fabric of human nature, stitched through grief, fear, and determination. In this market, you see the fragile yet stubborn will of a community to survive, rebuild, and hope. The future may still hold uncertainties, but for now, in the warm sunlight and the sounds of commerce, life goes on. Evenings in the village have taken on a quiet, reflective mood. As the sun dips low, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, you sit by the hearth, the flickering fire casting long shadows on the worn walls. The weight of the day's labor settles in your bones, but there's a faint comfort in this familiar routine. The Black Death changed how people saw their future. Where once you might have planned years ahead, fields to sow, weddings to arrange, children to raise, now the future feels like a thin thread, fragile and uncertain. You live more in moments, finding small joys wherever they appear. Stories have become a vital part of this daily rhythm. Around fires and in taverns, people share tales, some grim, some hopeful, many tinged with dark humor. It's as if laughter, even if shaky, is a quiet act of defiance against the grim reality outside. Historians still debate whether this surge in storytelling and folklore was a coping mechanism or a way to make sense of the inexplicable devastation. You suspect it's both. When the world feels cruel and unpredictable, stories help stitch together meaning. You recall the odd tradition of plague doctors, those eerie figures in beaked masks who wandered the streets. While often ineffective, their presence became a symbol of both fear and hope, a strange mixture of science and superstition. The stories children tell about them make you smile despite the melancholy. At home, your family grows closer in these shared moments. The worn blanket around your shoulders, the soft murmur of voices, the smell of stew simmering, all these small details become anchors in a sea of change. You've noticed that new holidays and rituals have emerged, blending old customs with new realities. Some celebrate the harvest with quieter ceremonies. Others mark days of remembrance for those lost. The calendar, once filled with festivals, now feels more solemn but no less significant. Quirkily, there's a newfound fascination with stars and celestial events. People wonder if the plague was written in the heavens, reading the sky for signs and warnings. Astrologers and soothsayers see a brief revival, offering predictions that bring equal parts comfort and anxiety. The church continues to hold its place, though its influence fluctuates with each generation's faith and doubt. You attend Mass occasionally, drawn by the ritual's familiarity, even when your heart wavers. As night deepens and the village settles into silence, you find a quiet strength in the routine, small acts that keep life moving forward despite the hardships. And though the road ahead remains uncertain, you rest with the knowledge that you've made it this far. That resilience, after all, may be the greatest legacy of all. The first light of dawn creeps slowly over the horizon, softening the jagged edges of the village rooftops. You rise with the day, the familiar aches in your body, a reminder that survival has come at a cost. Yet, there's a strange comfort in the routine, the steady cadence of life continuing despite everything. By now, you've seen the long shadows cast by the Black Death begin to lift, though they never vanish entirely. The social fabric is frayed, altered irrevocably by loss and change. Old hierarchies wobble, new possibilities glimmer on the edges. Peasant life after the plague is a complex dance between newfound opportunities and lingering constraints. Landowners sometimes grant more freedom, but often still cling to control. You've witnessed moments of rebellion and quiet negotiation, a constant push and pull. Historians still argue about how much the Black Death accelerated social change. Some say it sparked the early seeds of modernity. Others contend it was just one of many forces reshaping medieval Europe. You, living through it, know only the daily realities. The cold nights, the hard work, the fleeting smiles. You notice that new crafts and trades take root, diversifying the village economy. Blacksmiths, weavers, coopers, all finding fresh demand for their skills. You overhear talk of fairs in nearby towns where goods and ideas mingle and fortunes sometimes change hands. Quirkily, you find yourself intrigued by a newly popular pastime, playing simple board games by candlelight. It's a small luxury, a mental escape from the harshness outside, and you chuckle watching the children's fierce competitiveness over a game of 9 men's Morris. Community bonds have deepened in unexpected ways. Shared hardship has forged connections that might have taken generations to build otherwise. Neighbors watch out for each other, sharing food, news, and comfort. The church remains a cornerstone, though its role is evolving. You've seen new priests who focus less on punishment and more on compassion, preaching messages of hope and resilience. Still, faith is personal and varied. Some cling tightly, others drift away. As you prepare for another day, you feel a quiet pride. You have endured plague, famine, fear, and loss. You've adapted, struggled, and survived. The world around you is not the one you were born into, but it is the one you call home. And in the soft glow of morning, you sense that no matter what comes next, the human spirit, unyielding and stubborn, will persist. Now, as the story comes to a close, allow yourself to settle deeper into your bed, feeling the softness of your pillow and the gentle rise and fall of your breath. The harsh truths of the past may linger in your mind, but remember, history is not just a record of suffering. It is a testament to endurance and hope. The village you've walked with tonight faced unimaginable loss, yet life blossomed again, slowly and imperfectly, like a fragile flower pushing through cracked stone. Imagine the quiet strength in their footsteps, the warmth in their shared stories, and the steady light of community that guided them through dark times. Let your thoughts drift gently like the flickering flame of a candle, soft and steady. Tomorrow's uncertainties will come in their own time. But for now, rest in the calm after the storm. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history's shadows and light. May your dreams be filled with resilience, hope, and the gentle hum of life enduring. Good night.